Thank you.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the last session of the day, probably the most exciting session that you'll be at today. So I'm glad you could all be here. This is the Startups and IoT session. And basically, we're going to introduce you to 4 different startups and talk about their different journeys and their funding challenges, the different challenges they've faced, how they actually validated their solutions in the market, how they've engaged customers, partners, to basically deliver value across the ecosystem and within a complete solution set. Myself, I'm Jesse DeMesa. I'm a partner with Momenta Partners. I've been with Momenta for 2 years. Prior to that, I was CTO at GE Oil and Gas, digital, driving one of the major P&L's industrial internet journey for 3 years. At Momenta Partners, we're focused on connected industries, so we basically help companies accelerate their digitalization strategies. Either early-stage tech companies, we're an investor, so we invest in early-stage seed Series A investment in early-stage tech companies. We advise large enterprises like Schneider Electric, SAP, Cisco, companies that are basically trying to drive digital strategies to basically deliver unique value propositions into the industry. We do talent and executive search to build and bring talent to organizations driving digital strategies. And basically, we look across the whole ecosystem, and part of that ecosystem we serve are startups. Ron?
Thank you. So I'm Ron. Both Jesse and I are on the program committee. And my role at Microsoft is to lead the standards strategy for the Azure IoT product team. And as part of that, we work with various standards groups, but also consortia, large and small ecosystems. And we work with large companies as well as with startups. So when Jesse and I on the program committee started exploring different sessions that we can have, we really thought that it's important to give startups an opportunity to get some exposure and for you to learn from their experience. Some of you may want to partner with startups, some of you may want to start startups, and it's really important to understand what they go through. So we wanted to get some of their lessons learned, some of their challenges, but what we did is we have several startups here that will introduce themselves that are from different size companies and different stages, because we thought it would be interesting to hear from all of them as they go through the different stages. And Jesse and I will both moderate and we'll split between some business and technical questions, because we thought it would be interesting to explore both sides of that. So welcome again, thank you for coming, and with that we'll start with Brad and hear a little bit about each company and what it does.
Great, thanks Ron. So I'm Brad McMahon. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Development for Rigado, and we're based in Portland, Oregon on the west coast of the US. Rigado is actually about 8 years old, but made a pretty significant pivot in the last couple of years to get into product. And specifically, we deliver hardware and software for edge computing. Edge as a service is our model. So we brought in some outside money a couple of years ago in the form of an angel round, and then closed an A round this past June.
Thanks, Brad. Andy Ellicott from Crate.io. Crate develops the Crate data management software, really bringing SQL or machine data processing to the SQL masses of developers to help build applications that transform the way factories, smart cities, smart buildings operate more intelligently. Spent the last 2 decades with different startups like Vertica, VoltDB, Cloudant. So really a creature of early stage, and look forward to sharing my experiences and thoughts in that realm with you guys.
Hi, my name is Zach Gentry. I am the VP of Business Development for a company called View Dynamic Glass, which is the largest producer of electrochromic glass in the world, with an 85% market share in a market that's very small at the moment. We represent probably about 0.5% of the total glass market. So commercial glass in the world is approximately an $80 billion market, and we have a fairly small share of that total market, but obviously a growing percentage of it. View has been around for about, actually almost 10 years. 8 of that was mostly in R&D, dealing with material science, chemistry, and physics. The last 2 years has been a rapid market acceleration. And I think in the last probably year, the company has pivoted more to looking at smart glass as a product onto itself, into the ways that we can use smart glass as the bridge and barrier to data that we can transmit within the building and out of the building. So we're now, because we provide power and connectivity to the edge of the building, or actually any commercial space, we can now act as an intermediary for a lot of different kinds of products and services in the IoT space. And so that's why one of the reasons I'm here today. By background, I've been in smart buildings for about the last 15 years. I started a company in 2004 that was focused on wireless lighting controls at a time when wireless was a pretty new phenomenon, and started a company, or was on the founding team of another company in 2011 that sold last May to Siemens. So I've been in the startup world, and I'm excited to get the opportunity to talk to you about it.
Good. So everybody, my name is Andrea Fossati. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Parquery. We are a spin-off out of Zurich, Switzerland, and we are specialized in computer vision, which means that basically our core expertise is really using software to extract information from images. And as a first application, we decided to focus on the smart city domain, in particular on the parking use case. So we basically are getting images from basically any type of cameras, processing them in the cloud, and then retrieving information about the parking occupancy and parking duration in real time. The company is 4 years old, so we were founded in 2014. We are now 10 people. We had a seed round about last year, yes. And we are operating at the moment about 60 projects in 25 different countries. As you can imagine, I mean, compared to my colleagues here, we are a bit of an earlier stage, but at the same side, I'll be very happy to share with you my experience so far.
Okay, well, the first area we'd like to really explore is business challenges faced by startups. A very common one. Funding. What were the most important issues to get funding? And maybe not just your initial funding, but there was maybe even critical points where you needed follow-on rounds of investment. So maybe, Brad, you want to start there and talk about the key challenges and what you faced?
Sure. Yeah, I've had a lot of experience raising venture money with several other companies as well. But I think it's important to not only have a crisp story in terms of the market you're going after and how you think you're going to win in that market, but also to have some real customer traction immediately or early. That's these days really important, even in an A round or a seed round. People like to see some kind of validation with real customers using your products and services. So, I think that was something that we had gotten a lot of traction on at Rigado, and definitely served us well, along with the quality of the team and the space that you're competing in, not being too crowded. A blue ocean versus a red ocean kind of a concept. So,
Andy?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brad just said. I think great idea, clearly articulated. If you've got technology built and customers who've paid for the technology, all the better. I think the team is worth a ton, right? Tends to get overlooked, but team members who, at any levels, who've really have a history of success. And I think what's often overlooked, especially very early stage, is the repeatability, right? So going to the investors and be able to show that you have an ability to acquire new customers and a proven ability to do that. So as you're building up your early customers and early adopters, make sure you're also gathering the evidence that you need and the proof to convince the investors that you've got a way to keep growing your customer base and delighting them.
Anybody else would like to add anything on the funding before we go to the next question?
Well, maybe I would like to add one point, because this is also something that is probably very different between the US ecosystem and what we have here in Europe. Because what is my experience is actually that even having interactions and some customers is not enough here, at least for Series A. So the level of revenues that is required is probably higher in Europe than what you would expect for a Series A round in the US.
Yeah, it's actually, as an American who's worked with all-American startups until Crate, which is based in Austria, where I got to see that happen. I think with our Series A round raised this year, really saw, that's why I brought up the repeatability of the, your ability to grow your business pipeline. That seemed to be a lot more important to the U.S. investors in particular than I've seen in the past. A lot of them kind of take it
Absolutely.
for granted with the U.S. companies. So show pipeline, lead generation, the ability to turn that into pipeline, and also paying customers, measuring everything, how long it's taking to go from a new contact to somebody who's trying your technology to somebody who's paying for it, so you can really build that evidence and prove to the investors you've got a repeatable business and pipeline.
Yeah, I guess one other thing I would mention that Andy made me think of is the importance of a partner ecosystem as well. So we were very fortunate when we were going out for our raise. We had just cemented a pretty significant partnership with Microsoft, not as a revenue generator per se, but somebody who was, as a part of their digital twins platform, promoting Rigado within the ecosystem and very taking a pretty bullish position on how we could support what their vision is. So that was a big deal. It really helped us. So I think to the extent that you can find kind of lighthouse partners as well that accelerate your path to market or create a competitive advantage, that's another thing to look for.
Okay, great, thank you. So thinking about technology for a minute, because every company has their technology. Maybe Andrea, starting with you, thinking about what's unique in the solutions that you bring, but from considering obviously some of the business use cases. So what are some of the use cases where you're seeing the technology being taken to the market?
Yeah, I would say over there, one of the key points is really how scalable the technology is. So this is what we are trying to build at Parquery. It's not really just developing some algorithm that you can try, it works on a pilot scenario, but it's really being able to have a full pipeline that makes it repeatable over and over in an easy way. So let's say the cloud architecture is helping us a lot this way, because we can, as I said before, deploy projects pretty much anywhere in the world without moving from our office in Zurich. We just need to get some images from the customers, and there we go. So these are, I think, is really the key. Besides, of course, having developed a solid technology there at the university when we were still building up our first POCs. But I think the key part is really the replicability, scalability, normally via cloud architecture. We can maybe comment on this later on.
Okay, Brad, do you have any use case examples?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, that's one of the things that is also, I think, important as you, especially after you raise money, is really focusing in on what you're good at and not getting too far afield, because a lot of new opportunities come your way. So we're really honing in on where we're seeing the most traction and adoption, things like asset tracking, indoor asset tracking, logistics, sensing and monitoring kind of solutions. We do a lot in smart spaces. And things that are tied to things like occupancy sensing or space utilization, cold chain monitoring, and some of those types of asset tracking type of solutions are also where we're seeing a lot of activity. And then smart lighting too. We have a modules piece of our business, so we do some work there.
Zach, Randy, in your case?
Well, I mean, so I think one of the things that's unique about IoT space is maybe I've heard it said that it's a $100 billion industry, but it's really $100 billion industries, right? And so in each one of those separate domains, there's a unique set of attributes. And it's partially because, especially in the industrial IoT world, you're serving a small number of customers with very particular concerns. And a concern for one, just take any vertical market. The concern of one person in that vertical market or one customer in that vertical market might differ significantly from another. So I think when you develop a use case, and again, every solution is different. I mean, we're all talking about things that are at different stages of an end-to-end process, but in all probability, you have to really drill down to a particular customer and a particular customer's concerns and needs. And that customer's needs and concerns may be vastly different than another customer within the same domain. So the sort of use case that you need to develop has to be focused on a particular attribute or set of attributes that a customer has identified and that you can solve. And it may not, there may not be alignment. I mean, you may be really focused on one area of the, an end solution, and they may have solved that to the best of their abilities and are happy with what they've got. So I would say in terms of use cases, I tend to think of it more in terms of, for most solutions in the IoT world, how do you drill down to a specific set of problems with a specific customer who's willing to pay you enough to make it worthwhile? And then you can generalize from there. Now, what you tell to investors may be totally different. You may be talking about something that's general, but in specific, you're talking about how you're solving a customer's needs.
I think now we want to move to another business topic, which is, what do you see as upcoming opportunities? You've landed, you've established kind of a beachhead. And I know you're at different stages, and so how do you see those unique opportunities? How do you engage those opportunities? And what's that journey look like for you? And maybe starting with you, Zach, I mean, your company's been around for quite a while.
A while, yeah.
So, and how has that even transformed now that IoT's probably post-dates when you started the company?
Sure. So maybe ideas in specific related to View, and then ideas in general as you think about the market. So I've been involved with IoT from the days when we were trying to connect two radios effectively and unable to do so, to today when most of that's handled by Intel and ARM and other folks on that end, and the time when we were dealing with trying to put Java developers on one side connected to people that did embedded systems. And so you'd have people that spoke completely different languages in a room trying to communicate what the best thing to do was. Now, I would say most of the hardware, the MCUs, that's all been pretty much solved. And at the software, middleware, plumbing side, I'd say most of that's been solved as well. There's folks out there like Microsoft who are great at developing all of those end-to-end solutions, and what we're really focused now on are solutions that sit on top of those end-to-end solutions. And so for us at View, the way that we look at the world is great. All of those problems are solved. Let's focus on how we can take a platform and derive more value out of that platform. And so solutions that in my early days of startup world in IoT would take a year to develop, we can develop with partners that we have within a matter of 2 or 3 months. So what I would say is, keep close to companies like View. We're going to be putting out a lot of things that sort of add new value to this parametric value that we have for existing buildings. And then in general, I'd say, as we think about what's kind of interesting, the thing that I've been thinking about in terms of View, and I think in terms of other businesses, is we have maybe 3 different contexts for IoT. So we have a manufacturing context for IoT, we have a build time context for IoT, and that is a construction phase if you're in the building world. And then you have a runtime phase, which is how we actually operate and maintain buildings. Those things, started out in a manufacturing line. They've maintained some sort of integrity through the construction phase, and now they're being used in real time. Why aren't those things connected? So it'd be interesting to see if we can, and it may not be an IoT issue, it may be a blockchain issue, right? But the integral link between all 3 of those is actually something that would be interesting, and I think an opportunity that will be explored in the future.
Andy, in your case, I know that with Crate, you've had some success in some specific vertical markets, but you have a very horizontal technology. So
Yep.
how do you look at opportunities? I mean, is it regional? Is it different segments? Is it different use cases within
Yep.
the same segment?
Well, yeah, from a data management technology vendor like Crate, it's great, right? I think one of the opportunities for a lot of companies or startups in B2B and B2C is we'll apply artificial intelligence, machine learning. Both of those things have huge appetites for data, so companies like Crate that make it easier to put that data to work could be in high demand. But I think there's a lot that goes along with that, securing the information, the devices, the cleansing, preparation of the data, and so on. As Zachary said, that a lot of that technology has been developed, but adoption is lagging, right? So I think for those of you maybe on the consulting side who are looking at, I think there's a huge opportunity for change management and helping these companies really accelerate their digital transformations, their move to Industry 4.0, IoT, start adopting this technology that's ahead of them and putting this information to work.
Andrea, you came out with a very specific solution for a parking solution, but obviously underneath of that you have a platform. So what's been your vision there, and where are you moving to next?
Yeah, so the idea was, as was also mentioned before, to have a first use case in which we saw really the customer need and how we could solve it with the expertise we had. But then this for us would really be just the entry in a market that we can then explore much further with additional use cases which rely on the technology we have built up with the first use case. So we have built this parking platform, but then it's applicable to any sort of other related scenarios without much changes. So we are now exploring, for example, warehouse monitoring rather than traffic analysis, and all the technological pipeline is already there. So for us, it was really get a first use case, solid use case up and running, and now we can explore. Also within the same, more or less, customer base, because most of our customers are in the mobility domain. We are now exploring a few other scenarios with a single technological pipeline.
Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really interesting trends that's rapidly accelerating is this idea of non-technical businesses figuring out that they have an opportunity to instrument their business or their market in a unique way to differentiate themselves from the competitors. So CBRE would be an example of that as a real estate manager and owner, and they're pulling a lot of the smart spaces technology into these facilities and selling it as a part of an add-on feature to rent. So there's an existing footprint there that we can take advantage of, and revenue streams, and we see those types of ecosystems forming, and that's how we go to market. That's our path to market. So identifying where businesses are trying to do those types of digital innovations or transformations and helping to power all of that. We really see edge computing as being the next network, kind of like a Wi-Fi network, only smart. And I think that's what we're trying to capitalize on as we organize ourselves to go to market in a very prescriptive and focused way.
So picking up maybe on that thread, something Zach said about the platform vendors. There's a few large ones like Microsoft, a few cloud vendors, what you just mentioned about the importance of the edge. So maybe starting with you, Zach, from a technological perspective, given you've got the cloud and you've got the edge and you've got solution development, you've got sensor device companies, for a startup, how do you make the decision, or how did you evaluate how far where to put your solution and how far to take it from the cloud to the edge?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and actually I would add one additional sort of link in the chain, and that is the sensors themselves, right? So these sensors are usually accompanied by a chip, and that chip has the ability to do digital signal processing if it's possible. And you're probably using it to do some signal filtering. You may be doing some processing. You could be doing some processing. And you may actually have a complete computational model. You could be doing some actuation at that level as well. So the question is where you put the critical resource as close to the source as you can. Again, old days, you had small PIC chips that were all you could use to make actually anything happen. And nowadays you have something that's almost as powerful as your smartphone 5 years ago in an average sensor. And you need those for the kind of header files you need to transmit massive amounts of information for sure. But you also have a lot of free space. So pushing as much as you can to the sensor as a starting point, I think is a really important step. And then the next level, at the edge, I see an increasing interest in pushing computational data, and I think it's, I think Microsoft is doing quite a bit, just speaking since you're in the room, doing quite a bit to develop edge capabilities, containerized approaches to making the edge really reliable and robust. And then what I see more and more, at least for our applications, is we're taking highly contextualized data, metadata, into the cloud for post-processing, for kind of evaluation and sort of larger evaluations of data. But if we were to take the smallest amount of information and throw it up into the web, or onto the cloud, we would be putting an incredible amount of information. To kind of put that into perspective, we take 80,000 readings per second at a window frame. And of those 80,000 readings, because we're taking electrical signals, do we process it all at the window? Do we take it and put it on an edge device, or do we throw it up into the cloud? If we were to take it and throw it into the cloud, we'd probably use a server for every pane of glass every day. So we have to somehow distill that information, and I'd say the distillation, our preference would be to distill at the glass. Our next best preference would be to distill at the edge, and then our kind of tertiary in the cloud. And that's how we make our distinction.
Andrea, do you find something similar with your solution or different?
I would say in our case it's a bit different because in the end we have a full pipeline that goes from the sensor data, so in our case the images, to the information that we are able to extract. But what we have decided to do on our side is to have some flexibility there. So we can basically offload the whole computation at the edge if the customer requires, or we can have everything in the cloud. And there, of course, there is all intermediary steps. So in the end, we have seen that, for example, operating in different countries, also the perception of the customers of the cloud versus edge is a bit different. In particular, when talking about images, also data protection is always an issue. So sometimes customers prefer just to keep the images on site, never send them to the cloud, and just have all the processing there. Whereas in some other countries, this is really not a problem, and the flexibility that the cloud gives is much better, let's say, appreciated. So I would say that in our case, the flexibility of the whole pipeline gives us a boost over competitors which prefer maybe to have everything on the edge, for example.
Andy, what about your solution? Something similar? Or?
Yeah, I think it's, the platform providers like Microsoft are providing a lot of great solutions that really help accelerate the number of startups out there, and you can see there are a lot of IoT platforms. And I think that it's important for startups to really focus on the kind of outcome that they want to help their customers achieve, and build what you have to do to create that outcome for your customers' businesses, for your customers, for the people who are championing and buying your product, how you're going to really transform their careers. And if you find yourself building something that's a platform, a service in a cloud platform, it's like, don't waste time. It doesn't always help you to be the best, but being first is always a great advantage. So don't waste time building services that are, part of the infrastructure, cloud infrastructure already, and focus on that value add and what's really specific to the customer you're going after and the outcome you're trying to create.
Okay, thank you.
This next area, I love this question because it really talks about, as a startup, you sometimes get into where you have to deliver outcomes, right? And so sometimes it happens through maybe partners in the ecosystem that you work with to provide an entire outcome. And at different stages of startup, you might start with having to provide, in a sense, the whole end-to-end solution. Zach, you mentioned a case where, in the earlier days, some of the tech stack wasn't as mature, so you had to develop that. One, how do you see that in each of your different perspectives? Because in the end, you have a unique value proposition, a differentiation that helps deliver an outcome, but you might be faced with a situation where you might have to take many roles in the delivery chain. So maybe, Zach, you want to start with that?
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because I was thinking about an engineering meeting we had where we had just raised money, and 7 people on my team each had functional responsibility for a different part of an end-to-end stack, and each one of them had a reason why all of the money should be used on theirs, notwithstanding all of the business needs that we had. Today, I don't think that's the case. I think when we have a very lean team, an engineering, software engineering team that's composed of about 20 people. And most of those people focus on a very specific set of solutions, because a lot of the rest of the, I would say, our partners have enabled us to not to worry about the things we used to have to worry about. Things like security are of greater concern and less concern. Greater concern because people recognize that you can get information, as I heard yesterday from Sam George, you can get information about high rollers at a casino through the fish tank, which I didn't know about. But the more important fact there is that while security is more important, the solution providers have come up with security solutions that basically take that as a responsibility out of your hands. I remember trying to create authentication keys that were as long as, a few pages long, just to ensure that nobody could get into a lighting control system that wasn't otherwise connected, simply because our customer required it, in this case, a bank. So I would say the partner network has enabled us to be more lean in our organizations. We can have a single person who's responsible for security and something else, because what they're responsible really is for managing the relationship with our partners to get that done. And what that allows us to do is to focus more on value-added solutions. So we do have an end-to-end platform. I mean, we're building hardware, we're building software, we're building services on top of that. And so to the extent that we can continue to think up, instantiate new ideas within that platform and get them to a proof of concept within 2 to 3 months, it solves a lot of our problems. And I think that's where we are in the stage, at the stage of IoT that we're at. We're no longer trying to develop core fundamental things. We can get radios to connect nowadays. And we have enough memory on a chip that we don't need to be quite as tight with our coding as we used to be. So now we are allowed to be a bit more free in our solution.
Andy, in your case, now that you're focused strategically on the edge, but in terms of the solutions that should be delivered, extend all the way across, let's say, a facility complex, cloud to edge, maybe on-prem compute. How do you bring that all together to deliver the outcomes that you bring?
I think that's Brad. You're directing that to Brad, or?
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
yes,
you're talking
Brad.
to me. Yeah, well, I think, those are really hard decisions that you have to make as a team early on in terms of where you're going to make your bets and what part of the value chain you want to deliver to the market. And I think we did a good job of, introspection and really talking about what the core competencies of the company were and the team, and focused on the stuff that we knew we could do really, really well. So to some of the earlier comments around leaving the platform stuff to Microsoft or AWS or whomever from the cloud standpoint, and really delivering value in the for us in the edge computing infrastructure space was where we decided to make our bet. And we're betting on the cloud providers to be successful in continuing to drive some services to the edge that we can leverage on behalf of our customers, or to solve the business problems and use cases that are going to drive revenue. But we're not investing time in working in the areas where we feel like the ecosystem is already strong.
Oh, great. Andrea, with the parking solution, you look at let's say smart spaces.
Yeah.
Right, and your strategy extends beyond parking. But then you have a lot of players that are looking at things like smart cities and much broader initiatives. Do you play in that, and how do you kind of leverage that ecosystem?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question, because this is something that we have been actively doing in the past few months. Basically, what we know we have is the expertise in the computer vision domain. And many of the customers come up always with some requests. Hey, could you do this? Could you do that with your technology? At the moment, of course, we have to be focused as a startup. But on the other end, we see that even big players that we are talking to, so system integrators and smart lighting providers, do have some developments in the computer vision domain, but yet are not able to deliver a full working, reliably solution. They normally have some showcases. We have seen here also at the event many of those, but the real solution which brings from images to reliable and usable data, I think not many companies do have that for very specific verticals. So I think what we are trying to focus in is to have data and of course trained model for very specific verticals for which we can then deliver accurate results even just by using images and cameras.
Well, now maybe I'll get this right, Andy. So, since you provide a pretty flexible and extremely powerful kind of data management platform, but you're really helping to optimize manufacturing facilities, how do you make that happen when you've got just a core central strategic piece of the puzzle? How do you deliver that whole value proposition? How do you leverage the network?
Yeah, I think going from just infrastructure to a specific value proposition really takes a couple of things. I think number one, really listening to your flagship or your early adopter customers and taking something that's pretty horizontal like a database management system and especially an open source one, and looking for opportunities to increase the value of that to people and make it and kind of go back to that outcome and how can it really transform your business instead of just being a better, faster, cheaper way of managing data. So I think that working with customers to do that and defining something more valuable to them. And I think secondly, working with the partners. A lot of in our case, manufacturing, they have a lot of like system integrators and strategic consultants working with them, and aligning yourself with those companies and really learning from them and learning what the difference between something that feels like a killer feature at one customer and something that's a killer feature at all the customers, right? Because that first, the risky temptation with working with a few early adopters is that they might be, exceptional cases. So try to, make friends with the companies that consult to them and really are have getting more inputs from a larger sampling of customers so you can tell what's really going to be a marketable product or service.
So you touched on already the next question we were going to ask. So given the time we have, we may skip it. The next question was going to be around, everybody's got a great idea around that we've all probably thought we could start a startup. May have written on a napkin or whatever it is. And the question was going to be, do you find that it is you started with an idea that you then took to the market, or did you start with clients and discover a need and discover their requirements? And I think the latter is what you were talking about, is that you can identify something, and that's probably a better way to start than just coming up with an idea, then trying to push it, not knowing if there's a market for it. So before we get maybe to ask a couple of questions, I think maybe the next question that would be worthwhile to have, maybe starting with Brad and everybody, go through, which is what advice would you have for startups? I think it's important for everybody to hear, so maybe starting with you and going down the line, sort of if you, from the IoT world, what's advice would you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the idea is important. I think you're right, Ron, in that it should be obvious that there's a problem that you've identified that isn't being solved, and somehow the business you're going to create, or the product, the technology, the solution, is going to solve that problem or help to solve that problem. And to the extent that there's that you can see a market that way, and that you can't really find people doing that already or in an obvious way where it feels like there's a lot of runway, then I think you've got a good shot to get funded and grow the business and do the things you need to do, and you'll be able to attract a great team. I would also advise people who have had success working with certain people to keep the bands together when you try to start a new thing, because there's a lot of value in the trust associated with working with people that you know can deliver and that you can rely on, and you have a common sort of nomenclature with in terms of how you talk and language and understanding each other. So I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think, be brave, be bold, have fun. That's the reason I've spent my career in startups and not, larger companies. And, I think with that said, make friends and with the larger companies. Having relationships with companies like Microsoft really helps validate your technology, your ideas, your team, and really helps make growing your business and market a lot easier.
Well, I guess I would say everybody should start at least one startup in their life. And your success with that startup is indicative of whether you want to start a second startup or whether you want to go back to a big company, but everybody should start at least one startup. If you just came out of an engineering school or a business school or whatever, spend that time. You've been making no money anyway. Spend that time in your first startup. But by all means, start at least one company in your life.
Good. On my side, I think one very important message is that true, the idea is important, market fit is important, but what really matters is really the execution. So really focus on what you do and try to deliver it. Maybe at some time will be complicated, but if you really try to continue on your path, you will have results. And a second advice, which is more obvious, I think customer money is always better than investor money.
Great, thank you. With that, we have a couple of minutes. Open it to any questions. Anybody has any question for the panel? Anybody considering starting a startup? Anybody been in startups before? Show of hands. Few? No questions? I guess maybe we can select one of the other questions
Sure.
we have.
Well, let's talk about, how do you see the challenges of scaling your business, right? So you're at this point where you may be different stages, but maybe now you're at a point where you need to scale, grow your business. Maybe I'll start with Zach in that regard.
How do you scale? Well, so there's different kinds of scaling, right? So you can talk about scaling the technology, you can talk about scaling the team, you can talk about scaling your customers. And it all comes down to what you're going to spend your money on. And I would say everything is situational. So if you've really you think you've established something that is scalable and repeatable, then by all means, scale your customers. If you're still at a stage where you think that you have a sort of a solution that needs some additional work because you're not able to take it immediately from one customer to 10 customers and from 10 customers to 100 customers, spend all your money on, all your resources, I'll say, spend all your resources on, obviously dedicating more time and energy to the research team. But I think it's always a function of what, your needs, and your needs when you're in a startup are right there in front of you.
Please note that the IoT Solutions World Congress is now closed.
We have another minute. It's okay. We have another minute.
At the IoT Solutions
Just 30 seconds.
Yeah, we have 30 seconds still.
Right.
So.
Andrea, give it a shot.
Anybody else?
Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think as you scale your customers, sometimes, especially if you're a sort of cloud solution or a software as a service, you are in the situation where you need to scale your technology as well. Just having been through that a couple of times as a database as a service vendor at Cloudant and now Crate.io, don't underestimate the organizational requirements of having to scale to support lots of online customers. So, if you had a year's worth of new features that your engineering team was going to add, get ready to sacrifice some of that work while they reorganize and become much better at operating the software and dealing with a much larger customer base. That really cuts into new development.
Great, thank you. I think with the risk before they turn off the lights on us, please join me in thanking the panel for their insights and participation. Thank you very much. And thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness, it's gonna blow up.